you don't read the newspaper, you're uninformed. If you do read it, you're misinformed. What is the long-term effect of too much information?
Information, I just need some information. I've been dying. Is it lack of education? I've been reading without any transformation. I'm addicted. Is it overstimulation? Hey.
Welcome to the Sixth Sense Report.
Hear ye, come one, come all. You are listening to the Sixth Sense Report with Joel Nikoloff and Darnell Samuels.
Man, this one is going to be interesting for me, man.
It hits home.
I honestly wasn't even looking into the issue until we were going to talk about it. Like, in the sense that I just didn't want to know the details until I had to.
Were you like, say it ain't so? You mean like that?
Well, it's more that with the current outrage culture that I anticipate the commentary on this to be, I don't want to say disingenuous because that's not the right word, but it fails like most things to, have a nuanced conversation to understand cause and effect versus virtue signaling about, what we think should be done as a solution. And the prime example would be in respect to, I think, the stuff about the board, right? Like I'm not saying getting rid of the board and those calls are wrong. It's that I can't trust that those are deemed to be the right response as opposed to symbolically they're the right response, if that makes sense.
I'm not sure if I follow.
Okay, so
but just for the listeners, if you didn't read the title or you didn't read the fine print, we're going to be talking about Hockey Canada and the scandal that's going on with the organization. And the points Joel and I will be hitting are how important is Hockey Canada to Canadians, the moral corruption in Hockey Canada, and will Hockey Canada ever recover from this? So for those who don't know, basically Hockey Canada has hit a scandal, and I'm looking at the cbcsports.com and it says since May, the title of the article is called Hockey Canada Scandal Explained. CEO Scott Smith, board of directors stepped down amidst financial pressure. So Hockey Canada is Hockey Canada is experiencing fallout after settling a sexual assault lawsuit in May. And so it basically says that since May, Hockey Canada has been embroiled in a scandal after it was revealed by TSN that the organization settled a lawsuit with a woman who claimed to have been sexually assaulted by 8 players in 2018, including members of the U20 men's junior team.
And so what I was referring to was the calls for the board. Now, the calls for the board to resign, and the calls for the CEO to resign. My point was, part of the reason I was avoiding the conversation, or avoiding digging into the details, was with our current sort of cancel culture. The calls to cancel those people, I'm not saying that they're right or wrong. I'm saying that I wasn't sure I was going to find a nuanced conversation about why is that the right thing to do, as opposed to it is the symbolic thing to do. Now, I will say that as things have progressed and the reputation and let's say the cancel culture piece has continued, and I only say cancel culture as a reference, not trying to say that this is the same as other scenarios at all. I think the reputation of Hockey Canada and its advertisers and all of that's gone on, they had no choice other than, like, from a purely PR perspective, they had to cancel, or they had to ask for their board resignations.
Okay.
Because it's bad. It's bad. And one of the links I'll have in the show notes page, I think, is a CBC article that really does a good job of documenting all of it's called Tracking the Fallout of the Hockey Canada Scandal from October 7th. and it goes through a number of things, whether it's the different hockey associations. It does a good job of documenting what's the response from hockey associations, what's the response from different advisors. I know our producers chirping me for saying that CBC did a good job. I know it's a rarity, but sometimes for the most part, this seems like a pretty objective article of just documenting what happened, as opposed to, obviously there's a little bit of commentary, but for the most part, it's pretty much just like factual.
Okay, so then this fallout, how important is Hockey Canada to Canadians in light of what just happened? Do you think Canadians care? You think we care about this, or is it just like
I think this is where things are muddled.
Well, we're a hockey country, no?
Yeah, but there's Hockey Canada as it relates to, let's call it, all of minor hockey. And then there's Hockey Canada as it relates to professional development.
Sounds like the same thing to me, but go ahead.
Well, my point is that the kid who's playing house league, who's going nowhere, is potentially impacted by this. That's a problem.
Right.
But the professional development piece actually may be related to what's going on, is what I'm trying to say, right? So the minor hockey infrastructure that has pieces related to kids just playing sport, there's going to potentially consequences of an entire board and your CEO resigning, in that, like, does that impact the operational side of minor hockey? Or
maybe I guess my question is, are those guys bringing about results?
So from a perspective of,
are they winning?
Hockey Canada as a developmental for professional athletes and professional program, I would say the symbol is, look at how our let's call them major junior leagues. So your OHL, your CHL, and your Quebec League. So the Ontario Major Hockey League, the Quebec Major Hockey League, and then essentially CHL, which is the Canadian rest of Canada version of those two major league. So that would be, I want to say, up to 20-year-olds, and there's 5 years, so 16 to 20-year-olds for the most part. Contrast that with any other sports professional program in North America. So whether it's baseball, soccer, baseball, basketball, and football, for the most part, you go to an American high school, you go to American college as your, developmental program. Canada has separate leagues that people will move to Canada to play in the OHL, right? They will send the European who's at the top of their league potentially comes to Canada to play in our junior hockey leagues as the best way to get to the NHL. So in that sense, we have an exceptional developmental program. We are the best in terms of developing athletes. I mean, if you look at the NHL, 50% of the NHL roughly, and maybe that number is diminishing a little, 50% of the NHL professional athletes are Canadian.
Okay.
And so we do have the best development. The question is, will that affect this? I honestly would say it depends on really what, let's say, politicians and those outside that are calling for change deem as the cause. And so this is where, the cause of all these problems. And, if there's some articles sort of indicate that some of these nuances are specific to hockey. And so is, hockey culture the problem, is the question.
Yeah. I it's funny because I'm actually I shouldn't say it. It might sound bad, but I don't mean it this way, but I'm actually enjoying this conversation with my hockey friends, because I'm curious. I'm watching it and I'm wondering again, like, how is this impacting the hockey community? And are they kind of like, oh, I always knew this was going on. It was only a matter of time before we got caught. Oh, or this is a black eye on the community. And with that said, we'll transition into point 2, the moral corruption in hockey. And I'll just say this, and I'll pass the mic back to you. I don't see this in Basketball Canada.
Now, when you say this, what are you referring to? No, because
so for those listeners who aren't watching it on YouTube, I'm giving Joel that look like, what the hell? Come on, man. What do you mean? What am I referring to?
What
man, I just said that don't happen. This don't happen in basketball. Hoopers ain't doing this. Come on, man. What's going on?
Are you? So, because here's the thing, what I deem the biggest cause of the problems: God complex for elite players, unaccountability for elite players, and sexual depravity, highlighted as a cultural problem. And lastly, the lack of identifying what is positive masculinity, or in our sense, godly masculinity in culture. So I would say those are catalysts in all professional scenarios. And I mean, go look at what we've seen, professional NFL at a quarterback level only. Again, God complex reference. And I can explain the God complex reference in hockey a little bit. It's a little more nuanced, and I can explain that.
Yeah. Jump to that just for a second.
But there's like the God complex. I think if you go look at the NFL and the bad things that have happened there, where does it always happen? At the quarterback. And the God complex idea is that, like, I'm above these things, but also people worship you, and so you get away with things. And even in the sense of, like, when I say get away with things, I don't even necessarily mean illegal things. I mean, let's say treating women like garbage, right? Treating them as disposable, right? You get away with it because they worship you, right? So the God complex piece in hockey, the nuance is I think there's a bit more of a team God complex. And this has to do with the way that our system is a little bit, the sport is elitist at the same time.
What do you mean by that?
It costs close to $10,000 to play on a AAA hockey team a year.
$10,000? Whoa.
And your AA would probably be maybe $5,000. Your A, $2,000 to $5,000. So the elite players will probably make it onto the AAA team at a fraction of the cost, because the rest of the team, without them necessarily knowing it, the manager will essentially top up everyone else so that this kid who's your superstar, but it can only, his parents are poor, he's still on the team. But the God complex piece is that if you're in school and there's someone in your grade that plays AA, but you can say, oh, I play AAA, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how good that guy is. I play AAA, right? You're the best. And we have an abundance of high-end hockey, but it's very, very expensive because travel, tournaments, it's
equipment.
Ice alone it's like $400 an hour to minimum to rent ice.
Really? Here I am complaining about gym time to go play pickup.
yeah, dude. So
that's a lot.
So the other side of that, though, I think, with that elitism is also an additional unaccountability or lack of accountability, right? Because if you're coming up, I don't know about you, I'm assuming you've had this talk. Like, it's funny, you talk about, like, the talk that you got about cops. Dude, my dad gave me the same thing. It's like, you get pulled over, you put your hands on the wheel, you don't move, like, you got to be, like, that guy could, end your life. Like, and so I bring that up to say, like, when you're rich, your parents don't tell you that, because they just call the lawyer and they make it go away. Right? Like, we have a societal problem, or a systemic problem in our court system, that you get away with things based on money. And I think that is actually a compound to this issue. And so this is where the elitism in hockey, while I think it affects, the elites in any context, aren't held to, we're not all equal under the law. And I've referenced this before in different conversations that, your legal outcome is highly affected by how much wealth you have. And so I think there is an aspect. So this case, what I've read in the articles and what I would say is a fair comment is that the group nature of some of these accusations does seem to be unique to hockey. And I think hockey has a unique bonding of teams. And whether that's based on the nature of play, where, as much as you might have best players, it's very, very much a team sport. I think, Darnell, you could probably speak to basketball. Maybe there's a little bit more hate in teams and less camaraderie at times because of the battling and the limited number of players that really hit top points. And I think, and game breakers, let's say, whereas in hockey, to some extent on a AAA team, any given guy could win the game that day. And so my concern would be that you point out the negative side or the negative nuance, right, with regards to hockey having this group problem. Although, again, the one thing is, I think you've got a unique or new, you have individual scenarios that are problematic. And I would say, based on my conversations with some elite hockey players, it's not a pervasive problem, but the pervasive problem is at sort of the unaccountability level and the manner in which you're cultivating people's character. And again, I go back to the idea, like, where are we teaching men to be men, and what is a good version of men versus just plastering toxic masculinity over a Gillette ad as the means of we're communicating what it is to be, what's good. What does a good man look like?
Right.
I'm just wondering your take on like elite basketball, the group dynamic, and how much the bonding of a group exists there.
Well, yeah. I would say, just in regards to the bonding, I don't think basketball is as much of a team sport as hockey is, just because one man really can make the difference. And then, of course, in this country, basketball is great and it's growing, but and yes, the Raptors won a championship, but I still think Canada, hockey has a special place in Canada, in Canadians' hearts. But what's crazy is that, I guess, from the top down, and talking about character and moral accountability, from what I read, was that from 1989 till now, there's been 21 sexual assault payouts, and a total up to $9 million to pay out the victims, and that money was coming from the registration fees in Hockey Canada. And so clearly, there's been an ongoing issue with this.
Okay, so here we need to park this for a second, because there's so much nuance even with that statement. One is, and I'll have a number of articles I'll put in the show notes page, and I'm in one of the articles, and I can say this as also in the professional world. It is wise for a board to have funds for claims that potentially are not covered by insurance. Now, of the number you quoted, I don't have the number in front of me, but one of the articles, I believe it says 6.9 million of that 9 million was paid out to players who were assaulted by a coach.
Okay, but that's my point, man.
That is not a hockey specific problem. We know that, like, teachers, coaches, they're in a position of compromise, and someone who is looking for that, they're going to be driven to those positions. because that creates opportunity. So my
I
point
don't
though
know.
is
I don't know, man. I'm just saying. I don't hear too many coach sexual assault cases in basketball. But go ahead.
no, and my point is we don't hear a lot in hockey either, but we know about the trainer.
What are you talking about,
Hold on.
man? Come
We know about the
on,
trainer
man.
in American gymnastics who was doing this for like 20 years.
No, stop.
At the elite level.
Remember back at Maple Leaf Gardens. Remember that situation?
I know. There's
Come
also
on, man.
Theo Fleury. Theo Fleury has got a great testimony that he's completely transparent about, and how, sexual assault messed up his life, and he's now living in, as a recovering alcoholic because of the damage that went on. So my point though is that I would actually think most parents would appreciate the reserve funds to cover if something like that happened to their child in this context. That, hey, guess what? We are taking a portion of the fees that come to us, such that if the standards we put in place, like, play to protect, which I'm not sure if you're familiar with, but as a coach, a lot, like my brother was telling me.
Sorry, play to protect.
Play to protect. I think is the name of the program. Might have changed now. Basically, like, as a coach, I have to go through a training to understand.
Okay.
Like protecting the player. So my brother was saying for his kids to play hockey, he had to watch an hour and a half video about like avoiding bullying and different. So my point is especially today, there's a lot more infrastructure attempting to prevent, whether it be bullying or sexual abuse, right? Like, I know I was coaching 5 years ago now. When we were going through, one of the biggest things was make sure you, as a parent, especially as a coach and a non-parent coach, you are never in the room without another adult. Because that means there's no opportunity for not another adult.
Okay. So then my question is this: do you think Hockey Canada will recover from this?
I don't see how they don't, to be honest. That, like, in Canada,
I've heard from some of my other hockey friends that it won't recover from this.
So Hockey Canada is almost a monopoly. Now, the one, like, if Hockey Canada doesn't recover, I would speculate it ends up being a rebranding, new national body that everybody underneath it is still the exact same.
Mm-hmm.
So it might be Hockey Canada with a new dress, but it's still Hockey Canada.
Mm-hmm.
Because every province technically is its own association, but they just adhere to Hockey Canada's policies. And where this really becomes, like, people don't understand this. There's Hockey Canada sanctioned and unsanctioned. If you decide to play in an unsanctioned league, you're there for the year. Now, there's some minor exceptions. Like, obviously, if you're playing for your high school team in a tournament, there's no problem there. They might not be sanctioned, but they're not, like, you're not on a team. The best example of this would be if you're at an age where there's contact in your rep hockey, but you don't want to play contact. You have to go to an unsanctioned hockey league that does rep level hockey without contact. You are now in that league for the year. You cannot play in any sanctioned hockey at the same time. My point is that you've essentially created this tiered system where Hockey Canada has a monopoly on all of minor hockey if you're trying to make it to professional sports.
Well, that's fascinating. That's fascinating because that's not the lay of the land in basketball in Canada.
So no, it's much more. Would you say tournament based and independent, like school?
Yeah, independent, and then US has a big pull on what players do. But okay, so let me ask you, what's your 2 cents on the issue?
I think this issue, while it's happening in Hockey Canada, is a bigger issue, and I think much like the Joe Boot comment about institutions, this is another institution. It's perpetuating underlying problems. In and of itself, hockey is not the problem. The culture, the particulars of hockey isn't the problem. Meaning the group bonding, the character development of people isn't inherently the problem. It's that as I was saying, the 4 things I laid out at the beginning, right? I think those cultural factors result in a unique symptom of this underlying societal problem. And that's where, as I said, just I think you look at the NFL and its problem with, outlier quarterbacks. It's the same problem. It's just transpiring in a different place and in a different way. I think the thing that we haven't really touched on is that, many of these, like Hockey Canada's statement with regards to these payouts is that, if I'm not mistaken, most, if not all of them, were done in a context where no conviction occurred. And it was a matter, and their argument was, we recognize this person was hurt and we wanted to help them get past it. Even though no charges were laid, there was an accusation made, and now some people would have called it hush money. Now their position was it was to help this person move past the situation. And while you might say that that's false, blah, 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 at the end of the day, the dilemma is that with the God complex and the unaccountability, why are they unaccountable? Right? It's because the law, not everyone's equal under the law, right? Money can make things go away. And many of these players, because of the developmental system, become assets of the system. And what do you do when your asset is at risk? You protect the asset. But if we remove the means of protecting the asset, which is what I'm saying is the problem, right? Not being equal under the law, that's the problem. It's not something specific to hockey culture. It's that these players who have a God complex have been used to getting away with things because we don't hold them accountable. But that also goes to the cultural, the parents, the fact that the culture deems masculinity as toxic in and of itself, right? So, and you also have, the sexual revolution or the sexual push forward of, no, be whatever you want, do whatever you want, right? As long as it's consensual. And I would say, I'll put in the show notes page. There's a great interview that I shared with Darnell before this from Ted Bundy and Focus on the Family, talking about how his unchecked lust, in essence, and pornography helped shape his desires. And obviously, this is the most perverted, detestable person in terms of what one of the things they did. And he's not. And I would say this interview is really telling, I think, to understand how this can be a contributing factor to perverting the pleasures and the desires of someone's mind. Mm-hmm. And so even just the things that are in pornography that are close or similar or not that far removed from these accusations, especially the group scenario stuff that seems to be the big issue here. It's normalized in that culture to some extent, or in the fact that whether it's, let's say, storylines or whatever, it's turning the expectations to a manner that is unrealistic. And again, the culture's not cultivating, I would say, a godly or a biblical ethic towards sex. And I think if we, again, some might say that there's alternatives, but from my side of it, I think Darnell would agree, if we were promoting a biblical manner towards sex, that the acceptance of certain behaviors becomes much different than when we view sex as a pleasure to be taken part of, but with accountability, with protection. So I think just to maybe just to crouch all of my comments in any type of violation of another person and their property. Of course, I'm against, just take my standard my libertarian or non-aggression principle. By no means do I want to dismiss any, inappropriate actions that anyone's had with any of my comments. But I don't see anything specific about hockey culture or hockey environments. And, none of these things have ever been present in the 30 plus years that I've been playing, I've never seen anything like this. Even in my dressing rooms, in terms of, let's say, overly degrading comments to women or things like that maybe might be speculated or thrown out. I would say that in the dressing rooms I've been in, I've never seen, not to say that I haven't heard a comment that I'm like, you're an idiot, but my point is that I don't see it any more than I see it in any other locker room or male only context.
Mm-hmm.
What about you? What's your 2 cents on this?
I think that there's a saying. I can't remember who said it, but winning covers up a multitude of sins. Right? Winning covers up a multitude of sins. Not love, but winning. And so the idea is, clearly these guys are reckless, and that's why I asked in the start about, is the Hockey Canada program successful? So it's an institution, it's an empire, and so if guys are winning, then then they'll turn a blind eye to the misbehavior. And then, so I think about Jeremiah 31:29. It says, the fathers have eaten sour grapes and the teeth of the children are set on edge. And I was just like, So I think that I think Hockey Canada will recover because, the heart and strength of any program is usually at the grassroots level. And Canada's so big. I mean, hockey is so popular and so broad that, there's always talent sprouting up somewhere. And as long as you have talent, you always have a successful program. So I think that there's a lot of good men and women in Hockey Canada. Just a couple bad apples, right? One bad apple could spoil a whole bunch, but there's a lot of good men and women in hockey. And I'm sure that this is definitely a time for them to rise up and other people to change the way they've been doing things. Like your brother said, he has to, do some other, watch videos and really consider other aspects of the culture that he probably didn't have to think about before. Mm-hmm. So when you look at Proverbs 3:12, it says, for the Lord disciplines the one he loves, as does a father the son in whom he delights. So these boys who are running wild and think they could do whatever they want, I think they're going to be checked more, if not by their biological fathers, than by their coaching fathers. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah, and I think the one thing I'll leave this with is, like every organization, they always got to deal with a PR problem, right? Like, I mean, I'll touch on one thing in hockey. A couple years ago, there was a really good Ottawa Senators hockey team, and all of a sudden they were just blown up. And there's some whisperings as to what happened, but it really didn't make sense. Like, it didn't make sense that they had to, and the speculation would be that something happened that was, and it's not in this particular one. It's not any sort of sexual, at least not that I was aware of. It was sort of something else that was speculated as to what occurred and the manner in which and what happened. Did the NHL, did the Ottawa Senators pay to make this go away? But part of the deal was to make, they actually had to blow up their team because the dynamic of players were getting into things that they shouldn't have been getting into. And so, there's a dilemma here in that, the PR side of things sometimes can skew our perspective because there's always a manner of saving face. We have to understand that. That's always going to happen. And sometimes saving face might be a lack of being, publicly transparent about things, but that doesn't necessarily put things offside. And so I just say that to say that, we clearly are judging from the outside, and I think it's really easy to come to certain conclusions and just chalk it up as, they're just, protecting the oppressor. But I know the one that the case that they just settled is when I dug in and read it, part of the reason they settled was because, like, to actually relive an event for the person who's been traumatized is very difficult. Like, I have a close friend of mine who basically was the, lead plaintiff, if you want to call it that, in a case against a teacher. And honestly, the thing that traumatized her the most was going through the court case and reliving every detail. And so, the idea of like paying out the money, even if it was a false claim, we know that if we tried to force them to prove it, it was potentially more traumatic. While punishing the person might be the right thing, would punishing them while leaving somebody with a lifelong trauma because I forced them to relive it in every little detail in a court case be the right decision? And so these are really difficult things to wrestle with, because it might mean that things aren't as transparent as we want them to be as an outsider. But for all the individual harms that went on in the scenario, for the privacy of the individuals, for actually moving on, what they did might have actually been the best thing. From a transparency perspective is the part that I'm referring to. So it's really tough. And, I think it's really easy to become outraged, especially if we assume the worst and be like, those people need to be punished. That's wrong. They shouldn't have got away with that. But that's where I go back to, in general, we have an accountability problem because we allow the court systems to, money to play a bigger role than it should, or wealth to play a bigger role than it should in terms of what's the outcome that occurs.
Mm-hmm. So what do you guys think? What's your 2 cents on the issue? Is Joel wrong?
Is hockey corrupt?
Is hockey corrupt? Yeah. Let us know what you think. If the situation was handled correctly, or if there's other things that Joel and I missed on the issue.
6 cents makes change.
But you heard me? Does that make sense?
Madden and Mitchell Media.